The most feared man in Seoul didn't scare her, and that was the most dangerous thing she ever did. Elena Whitmore was nobody. A broke American girl in a foreign city, carrying other people's wine and swallowing her own pride every single night. Kane Voss was everything she wasn't. Untouchable, ruthless, surrounded by men who'd rather die than disappoint him. One moment, one decision, one elderly woman choking while the whole room held its breath. Elena put down the tray, and Seoul would never be the same. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you do not want to miss where this goes. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The shoes were the first problem. Elena had bought them secondhand from a market stall near Hongik University. Black flats with a thin sole that had already started peeling on the left heel. Every time she crossed the marble floor of Lumiere restaurant, she could feel the cold seeping up through the gap, a tiny reminder that nothing about her life in Seoul was as polished as the surfaces she walked across. She'd been in the country 14 months. 14 months of 12-hour shifts, of practicing Korean in bathroom mirrors during her 5-minute breaks, of sending half her paycheck home to cover her father's dialysis treatments back in Columbus, Ohio. The culinary school application she'd filled out sat in a folder on her phone, complete, ready to submit. But the deposit was $3,000 she didn't have yet and wasn't close to having. She wasn't complaining. That was the thing people misunderstood about Elena Whitmore. She wasn't built for complaint. She was built for endurance. There was a difference, even if some nights she couldn't remember what it was. Lumiere was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise. You knew about it because someone who mattered told you about it. The chef was French-Korean, trained in Lyon, and the tasting menu ran 14 courses and cost more than Elena made in a month. The walls were real gold leaf. The chandeliers were custom. The clientele arrived in cars with tinted windows and left in them too, and nobody asked questions about what they discussed over the Wagyu and the 1986 Bordeaux. Elena had gotten the job through a contact at a culinary networking event, a stroke of luck that still felt faintly unreal. The pay was good. The tips were better when she kept her head down and her opinions to herself. She was learning, she was saving, she was managing. She told herself that every night. The shift started at 6. By 7:30, the main dining room was full. Politicians she half recognized from news thumbnails, a woman in a cream dress who turned out to be a Supreme Court judge, 3 men in matching charcoal suits who nobody introduced. Lumiere ran on a code of elegant non-acknowledgement. Everyone there had something to hide, and the unspoken agreement was that the staff saw nothing. Elena was good at that. She was carrying a second bottle of Côte de Nuit to table 7 when the side door opened. The room changed before she saw him. That was the only way she could later describe it. The air pressure shifted, conversation dropped half a register, and even the sommelier, a precise Korean man named Mr. Choi, who had never once looked rattled in Elena's presence, straightened his jacket with a small, instinctive movement. Kane Voss walked in like a man who had stopped caring what rooms thought of him years ago. He was taller than she expected, not that she knew to expect anything. She didn't know who he was yet. She just saw a man in a dark suit with no tie, jaw set like carved stone, a faint tattoo curling up the side of his neck where the collar left it exposed. He moved without looking around, the way people move when they've already calculated every exit. 2 men followed him, not beside him but slightly behind. Not quite bodyguards, not quite assistants. Something in between. He sat at the corner table, the one they kept clear until he arrived. Elena would later understand. She found out his name from Ji Young, one of the senior waitresses who handed her the Côte de Nuit and said, quietly and without breaking her professional smile, "Table 9 is Kane Voss. Do not spill on him. Do not ask him anything. Do not look at him too long." "Who is he?" Ji Young's smile didn't waver. "Someone you want to be invisible to." Elena took that in. She wasn't reckless. She had too many real problems to go looking for more. She nodded, balanced the tray, and went back to work. For the next hour, she kept to her section, which thankfully didn't include table 9. She watched from a professional distance. Kane Voss ate slowly, spoke in low tones to the two men with him, and refused the breadbasket with a slight gesture that suggested he'd given up on small pleasures a long time ago. He drank water, not wine. He looked at his phone once and put it back without reacting to whatever he'd seen. She got assigned to the adjacent section at 9 o'clock when two of the evening staff needed to manage a private room upstairs, which meant she was within range, which meant she was carrying a tray of wine toward table 8 when the woman at table 11 started coughing. At first it sounded like nothing, the polite throat clearing you hear at formal dinners when someone swallows too fast. But within seconds, it was different, rougher, wrong. The woman was in her late 70s, maybe older, white-haired and finely dressed, there with two younger companions who were already looking at each other with that helpless, frozen panic that means they have no idea what to do. Elena heard the pitch change. She'd done 2 years of a nursing program before she switched tracks to culinary arts, and she recognized the sound of a real obstruction even under ambient restaurant noise. The woman's face was going from pink to a deep, mottled red, and her hands were at her throat, the classic position, the one you see in safety videos and pray you never see in person. She was choking, not just coughing, choking. Elena's tray had a bottle of 2019 Gevrey Chambertin on it that cost $900. She set it on the nearest surface, the edge of table 9, without asking, without thinking about who was sitting there, without thinking about anything except the woman who was running out of air 15 feet away. She heard the silence extend outward from that table like a crack in ice. She didn't look back. She reached the woman in 4 steps and crouched beside her. "Ma'am, can you cough? Can you make any sound?" Nothing came out except a strained, hollow wheeze. Elena moved without hesitating, got her arms around the woman from behind, locked her fist just below the sternum, and delivered 3 hard, upward compressions. The entire restaurant had gone quiet. On the 3rd compression, the obstruction cleared. The woman gasped, a huge, ragged, desperate intake of air that was the most honest sound Elena had heard all evening, and then coughed hard, and then started crying softly because fear and relief feel the same in the body for about 30 seconds. Elena kept her hands on the woman's shoulders and said, low and steady, "You're okay. Breathe, slow. You're okay." She didn't hear Kane Voss stand up. She didn't hear him cross the room. She only became aware of him when the space behind her changed and she looked up to find him standing 2 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not surprise, exactly. Not the cold blankness she'd caught glimpses of all evening. Something quieter than either of those things. The 2 companions at the woman's table were now fussing over her, pressing her hands, calling for water. The woman herself looked shaken, but whole. Elena exhaled something she'd been holding since the moment she put down the tray. She stood up. Kane Voss was still looking at her. She became aware suddenly and all at once of the room's attention, the weight of it, directed entirely at her and at him, and at the strange suspended moment between them. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. Apologize for setting a $900 bottle of wine on the edge of his table without permission? Thank him for not reacting? Explain herself? She was tired. Her heel was coming off her shoe. She'd been on her feet for 5 hours, and she still had 2 more to go. She said, because nothing else came to her, "Sorry about the wine." A pause, long enough to be deliberate. "You made the right choice," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. Level. Like a man who'd spent years learning to say things only once. He turned and walked back to his table. His companion said nothing. Mr. Choi appeared from somewhere to retrieve the wine bottle with trembling hands. The room exhaled. Conversation resumed in pieces, awkward and reassembled, the way talk resumes when something real has interrupted performance. Elena went to the back hallway. She stood there for 60 seconds with her back against the wall and her hands pressed flat against her thighs. She could feel her pulse in her palms. She breathed. She went back to work. She didn't know yet what she'd set in motion. 3 days later, Ji-young pulled her aside before the evening shift and told her quietly that Table 9 had called ahead to request Elena's section for the next 2 Thursdays. Elena stared at her. "He asked for me specifically?" Mr. Choi told me this morning. He seemed confused about it, too. Ji Young studied her. What did you say to him? Nothing. I said sorry about the wine. Ji Young looked at her for a long moment. Elena, Kane Voss does not make requests. He makes statements. If he wants your section, he wants your section. Elena went home that night to her apartment near Mapogu, a small place, efficiently managed, everything in its right spot because mess was a luxury she couldn't afford when her brain was this full, and sat on the edge of her bed thinking about a man who ate alone and refused bread and watched a stranger save an old woman's life and said 4 words like they cost him something. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself that for 6 days. The second Thursday, Kane Voss arrived at 8:15 with no companions. He sat alone at table 9. Elena was assigned the section. She went through the standard greeting protocol, but still and professional, nothing extra, and he ordered water and the tasting menu without looking at the menu, which meant he'd either been here enough to have it memorized or he simply didn't care. She served the first 4 courses with the efficiency she'd developed over 14 months of making herself invisible to people who paid not to see their staff. During the 5th course, without preamble, he said, "You work 2 other jobs." She stopped. She set down the small ceramic plate in her hand with more care than the moment required, purely to give herself a second. "That's not a question," she said. "No." She looked at him directly. The tattoo on his neck was more complex up close. Geometric, precise. The kind that didn't happen by accident. His eyes were dark and unhurried and doing exactly what she'd been told not to do. Looking at her like she was actually there. "Why would you know that?" she said. "I looked into you." The honesty of it caught her off guard more than the act itself. He hadn't tried to dress it up. "That's a boundary violation," she said, keeping her voice flat. "It is," he agreed, without apology but without contempt either, like he was simply acknowledging a true thing. "Then why tell me?" "Because you'd want to know." She stood there in the middle of Lumiere restaurant holding a tray and trying to figure out what kind of man this was. Not the kind she'd dealt with before, Teets. The powerful men who wanted you to pretend they weren't crossing lines because acknowledging the line made the dynamic uncomfortable. Kane Voss seemed uninterested in comfort. "Don't do it again," she said. She walked away. He didn't call after her. When she reached the back corridor, she realized her hands were steady. That surprised her more than anything. She served the remaining 9 courses without incident. When he left, there was an envelope under the water glass. She picked it up with a napkin and took it to Mr. Choi. "Open it," he said. Inside was a card with a number. Nothing else. "That's his personal line," Mr. Choi said. He looked like a man trying not to have an opinion. Elena put it in her apron pocket. She went home. She put it in the folder on her nightstand next to the culinary school application and her father's latest medical summary and a photo of her parents from 1994 when they still looked like people who believed things would get easier. She didn't call. She didn't call for 11 days. On the 12th day, she came home from her afternoon shift at the cafe near City Hall, a 4-hour stint serving Americanos to people who typed on laptops, and found the lock on her apartment door broken. Not forced looking. The kind of break that happens when someone who knows what they're doing takes their time. She stood in the hallway. Her instincts said, "Don't go in." She stood there for a full minute listening to the building sounds around her. Someone's television, the elevator shuddering on a lower floor, the particular silence of her own apartment, which was now the silence of a place that had been disturbed. She went in anyway because all her things were in there and she had nowhere else to go. They'd been careful about it. Nothing obviously ransacked. But she could see it. Drawers were turned wrong, the small rug near her desk moved by an inch, her phone charger on the wrong side of the nightstand. Someone had been through everything, and they'd been professional about it, which was almost worse than if they'd trashed the place. Trashing was anger or desperation. Professional meant something else. Professional meant they were looking for something specific, and they knew how to look. She stood in the middle of her apartment and breathed. Then she went to the nightstand and opened the folder. The card was still there. She picked up her phone. She stared at the number. She thought about 14 months of silence and saving and holding herself together with schedule and distance and the knowledge that she was managing. She was managing just fine. She dialed. He picked up on the second ring. "Someone broke into my apartment," she said, without greeting, without her name. A pause. 3 seconds. "Are you inside it now?" "Yes." "Don't touch anything else. I'm sending someone. Go to the lobby." "I'm not—" "Elena." The first time he'd used her name. "Go to the lobby." She went. She sat on a bench near the front desk of her building, the night guard watching her with polite confusion. And she thought about the way he'd said her name like he'd been saying it for longer than he should have been. And she thought about the silence in her apartment and what it meant that someone had moved her phone charger. And she thought about the old woman gasping back to life under the chandelier light of Lumiere restaurant. And she thought about the 4 words he'd said that night like they cost him something. "You made the right choice." She was beginning to suspect that she hadn't understood yet what choice she'd actually made. 2 men arrived in 11 minutes. Not police. Precise, quiet, dressed like businessmen but moving like something else. One spoke briefly with the night guard. The other approached Elena and said simply, "Mr. Voss is on his way." Elena looked up. "He's coming here himself?" "Yes, ma'am." She sat back against the wall and closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. She could still hear the elevator shuddering somewhere above her, and somewhere in her apartment was the quiet rearrangement of everything she'd convinced herself was safe. And somewhere across Seoul, a man who frightened entire rooms into silence was getting into a car and coming to find her. And she didn't know whether that was the best thing that had ever happened to her or the start of something she wouldn't be able to stop. She suspected it was both. Kane Voss arrived in 14 minutes. Not 12, not 20, 14. Elena noted it without meaning to. The precise interval between her phone call and the sound of a car door in the street below. Between the moment she'd admitted she needed something and the moment help materialized. She would later understand that 14 minutes from wherever he'd been to Mapogu at that hour of night meant he hadn't been far. She didn't examine what that implied. He came through the lobby door alone. The 2 men who'd arrived before him acknowledged him with the smallest possible gestures. A slight shift of weight, a half step back, and then became part of the background so efficiently it was almost architectural. Kane looked at Elena on the bench and said nothing for a moment. He was reading her the way you read a room you're not sure is safe yet. Quick, complete, nothing wasted. She stood up because sitting while he stood felt wrong in a way she couldn't fully explain and didn't want to examine too closely. "Did you touch anything after you called me?" he said. "I moved through the apartment to check what was disturbed. I didn't pick anything up except the card." "The card?" "Your number, from Lumiere. I'd kept it." Something moved across his face, brief and contained. "Show me," he said. She took him up. The night guard watched them go with the careful non-expression of a man who had decided this was not his business, which was probably the smartest decision he'd made all week. Her apartment on the 4th floor looked exactly as she'd left it, which was the problem. Kane walked the perimeter of the main room slowly, hands in his pockets, not touching anything, his eyes doing the work. He moved like a man who'd learned to assess damage before he felt it. "Desk," he said. Top drawer was returned facing the wrong way. "My system is specific." He looked at her. "Your system." "I organize by priority and frequency of use. I know where everything is. Someone put the drawer back at the wrong angle." "What were they looking for?" "I don't know." "Think." She didn't appreciate the command, but she'd already been thinking about it for the past 20 minutes, so she let it land. "I don't have anything worth taking. No cash kept here. My laptop has nothing sensitive. My documents are all standard. Passport, work visa, employment records." She paused. "Unless they weren't looking for something to take." Kane had stopped near the window. "Say that again?" "Unless they were looking for something to know, not to steal, to understand what I have, what I know, who I'm connected to." He turned away from the window and looked at her with an expression she still couldn't fully map, but was beginning to recognize as his version of confirmation. The face he made when someone said the true thing. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "Somewhere not here." "That's not an answer." "No." he agreed. But it's what I have right now. She held his gaze for a count of 3. She was tired. Her feet ached. The broken lock was going to cost her money she didn't have, and probably a conversation with her landlord that would go badly because his English was limited and her Korean still cracked under pressure. She had a 6 a.m. shift at the cafe. She had her father's next payment due in 11 days. She picked up her bag from beside the bench where she'd dropped it when she first walked in and found the lock wrong. She hadn't unpacked it. Some part of her had already decided, apparently, before the rest of her caught up. "If I don't like where this is going," she said, "I leave." "Yes," he said, simply, without negotiation. They went. The car was dark and quiet and moved through Seoul's late-night streets with the particular fluency of a vehicle that never gets stopped. Elena sat in the back and watched the Han River appear between buildings and disappear again, and she thought about the night guard's face and Ji Young's voice, saying he doesn't make requests, he makes statements, and the way her apartment had been violated so cleanly it almost felt polite, which made it worse. "You said you looked into me," she said. "Yes." "How much?" "Enough." "That's not—" "Your father, Ray Whitmore, 63, dialysis 3 times a week at Columbus Regional. Your mother passed 4 years ago. You finished 2 years of nursing school at Ohio State, left to pursue culinary training, came to Seoul on a working holiday visa that you've since converted. You send money home every month. You've been saving for the Culinary Institute deposit for 7 months. You're $400 short." The city moved past the window. "You had no right to any of that," she said. "No." "Does that bother you?" A pause. Outside, a bridge over the river, lit orange from below. "It should," he said finally. Probably. She let the word sit there, sharp-edged. "You're the most honest, dishonest person I've ever met." He said nothing. Which, she was learning, was not silence. It was consideration. "Why do they want to know what I know?" she said. "What do I know?" He didn't answer immediately, and she'd already learned that his delays were not evasions. They were him deciding how much of the truth he could give without giving everything, and calculating where the line was. "The night at Lumiere," he said. "The private room adjacent to the main dining floor. Do you remember it?" She did, partially enclosed by frosted glass panels, the kind that muffled sound without eliminating it entirely. She'd passed it twice that evening carrying trays to the back corridor. "I wasn't assigned to it." "No, but you walked past it. At 9:43, when you were moving between sections, the door was open by approximately 30 centimeters for about 40 seconds while the staff changed the course plates." She thought back. She'd been focused on her tray, on the elderly woman at the nearby table who'd been laughing too loudly at something, on the sound of the sommelier's card on the marble. She hadn't been listening for anything particular, but she had heard something. A voice, low and in Korean, saying a name, and another voice responding with a number she'd registered without meaning to. 12 digits, financial, the cadence of account information, the rhythm you learn when you've spent months handling restaurant receipts and tax forms in a foreign language and start to hear its patterns. She'd heard it and filed it as background and forgotten it until now. "I heard a name," she said slowly, "and numbers." Kane's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Say the name." "I don't know if I—" She stopped. "Park Jae-won." The interior of the car changed temperature. She didn't know how else to describe it. Kane's posture didn't shift, but something behind his eyes went somewhere fast and hard. "And the number?" She said it. All 12 digits, in the order she'd heard them, because she had a memory that worked like a filing system whether she wanted it to or not. A thing she'd always attributed to her years in the kitchen, learning recipes and ratios, and the precise choreography of plating under pressure. Kane said nothing for a very long time. The car had slowed. They were somewhere near Hanam-dong, she thought. The buildings were larger here, spaced differently, a neighborhood where wealth wore itself differently than at Lumiere, less performed, more settled. "Park Jae-won is not someone whose name gets heard accidentally," he said. "Who is he?" "Someone who makes problems disappear, currently in the process of arranging for a significant amount of money to be moved through channels that, if discovered, would implicate 3 sitting government officials and end the careers of 2 men who are very important to very dangerous people." Elena processed this. And I heard the account number it's being moved through. Yes. And I didn't know any of this. No. But they don't know that I didn't know. No, he said again. They don't. She sat with that. Outside the car, Soul continued being Soul, immense and indifferent and blazing with light that didn't belong to anyone. So they went into my apartment to find out if I'd written it down, she said. If I'd told anyone, if I had anything, or to determine whether you were working with someone who sent you there deliberately. That's insane. I was carrying wine. I know that. Do they? He didn't answer, which was its own answer. They arrived at a building that didn't announce itself. No doorman, no obvious security, just a lobby that was immaculate and empty at this hour, and an elevator that required a card she watched Kane produce from his inside pocket. He pressed the button for the 27th floor without explaining anything, and Elena stood beside him in the elevator and looked at their reflections in the brushed steel door and thought that she looked exactly like what she was, tired, underdressed, carrying a bag with 2 days of clothes in it because she'd unconsciously packed for displacement before she even knew she was displaced. The penthouse was not what she expected. She'd braced for the visual vocabulary of crime, aggressive art, ostentatious furniture, the kind of space that screams power at you. Instead, it was spare, clean lines. One wall of floor-to-ceiling glass showing Soul in every direction. A kitchen that made her catch her breath, briefly, before she remembered where she was and why. A man was waiting inside. Late 50s, with the posture of someone who'd spent decades deciding things, sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee cup and a tablet, and the particular stillness of a person who was accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room he occupied. He looked at Elena the way people look at problems they didn't order. "This is Shin," Kane said. "He runs my operations." Shin said in English that was precise and slightly formal, "You shouldn't have brought her here." She had nowhere else to go? That's not a strategic reason. No, Kane said. It's not. Shin's eyes moved to Elena with something that wasn't hostility exactly, but was several degrees colder than neutral. "Miss Whitmore, do you understand what you've walked into?" "I understand parts of it," she said. "I'm working on the rest." "The people who searched your apartment work for a man named Damien Crowe. He operates competing interests in this city, and he has been watching Kane for some time, looking for leverage. Discovering that Kane has a personal interest in a restaurant employee who was present during a sensitive conversation gives him several options, none of which are good for you. I'm not Kane's—" She stopped. "Personal interest." The phrase sat awkwardly. "I'm nobody's leverage." "Everyone is someone's leverage," Shin said, without cruelty, with the flat conviction of a man who had simply counted the examples. "The question is whether you understand that now, before it becomes relevant in ways you can't manage." Elena set her bag down on the nearest chair. She looked at Kane. He was watching her with that same unclassifiable expression, the one that wasn't cold and wasn't warm but was something more specific than either, something that involved attention in a way she wasn't accustomed to from people who had power over situations she was in. "You knew this was coming," she said to him. "When you started requesting my section at Lumiere, you knew there was a risk." "I knew there was a possibility," he said, "that someone would make me a target." Yes. The honesty of it hit differently than she expected. Not because it was shocking. She'd already understood in the car that she'd stumbled into something with real weight. But because he hadn't softened it. He'd looked at her and told her the true thing, again, the way he kept doing, and she didn't know if that was respect or just a particularly efficient form of manipulation. "Why me?" she said. "Of all the... Why did you keep coming back to the restaurant? There was nothing between us. We exchanged 12 words." Kane was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Shin had gone carefully still, as if the question was more significant than Elena understood. "Because in 14 years," Kane said, "I have not once been in a room where someone made a choice that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with what was right. You didn't know who I was. You put down the wine because a woman was choking. That was it." He paused. "I have people around me who would have let her die rather than risk my reaction." The room was quiet. "That's a terrible thing to say about your life," Elena said. "Yes," he said. "It is." Shin set down his coffee cup with a small, careful sound. "This is not the time." It's the right time, Kane said, and something in his voice closed the door on the conversation cleanly and without drama. Shin said nothing further. Elena looked at the kitchen. The range was commercial grade. 6 burners, cast iron grates, the kind that held heat properly. There was something absurd about noticing that right now. She noticed it anyway. What happens next? She said. Tonight you stay here. There's a room. Tomorrow we figure out how much Damien knows and what he intends to do with it. And if he intends to do something I can't live with, then we make sure he can't. She studied him. You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's clear. She thought about her apartment with the drawer facing the wrong way and the charger on the wrong side, and the comfortable fiction of safety that had taken 14 months to build and about 45 seconds to become something she couldn't go back to. She thought about her father's voice on the phone last Sunday, tired and slow in the way dialysis tiredness sat different from regular fatigue. She thought about the culinary school application in the folder on her phone, complete, waiting. She thought about the 4 words Kane had said at Lumiere, and how they hadn't left her in 11 days, and how she'd told herself that was nothing. She picked up her bag. Show me the room, she said. It was a spare bedroom, minimal, clean, a window facing east. She set her bag on the chair in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed and listened to Seoul outside the glass. The low hum of a city that never fully slept, traffic 12 floors below, something like wind but not quite. She didn't sleep for a long time. At some point past 2 in the morning, she heard voices from the main room. Kane and Shin, Korean, low and rapid. She caught fragments. A name she didn't know. A number that sounded like a date. The word for problem, which she knew, and the word for contained, which she also knew, and then a silence followed by Shin's voice saying something she didn't catch, and Kane's response, 3 words, flat and final, that ended the conversation. She heard a door, then quiet. Then, after a moment, the sound of the kitchen. A cabinet. Water running. The specific sound of someone making coffee at 2:15 in the morning because they are not going to sleep either. She looked at the ceiling. She had come to Seoul to learn how to cook, to build something with her hands that wasn't about survival or obligation, to become, in the specific and private way she'd never told anyone, someone who created things instead of just enduring them. She hadn't come here for this. For broken locks and account numbers she couldn't unhear, and a man who told her terrible truths about his life with the same tone other people used to report the weather. But she was here. And the drawer was facing the wrong way. And somewhere in this city, a man named Damien Crow was calculating what she was worth as a problem. She got up at 6:15 because the alarm on her phone said 6 a.m. cafe shift, and her body complied before her brain caught up. She stood in the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror, hair pressed flat on one side, eyes with the particular weight of not enough sleep, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a kitchen accident at 19. She looked like a woman who had been managing for a long time and was currently deciding whether to keep managing or to do something different, and not yet sure those were actually different things. She came out to find Kane at the kitchen counter with 2 cups of coffee, looking like he hadn't slept either, but carrying it better, the way people carry sleeplessness when they're accustomed to it. He pushed 1 cup toward her without comment. She took it, drank. The coffee was very good, which was somehow the most disorienting detail of the entire situation. I have a shift at 6, she said. I know. I'm not skipping it. He looked at her. I'll have someone drive you. That's, she started to say, unnecessary and stopped, because the broken lock was still in her head, and the professional competence of whoever had gone through her things was still in her head, and unnecessary was maybe the wrong word for this morning. Fine, she said. Elena. She looked up. What you heard at the restaurant, the name and the number. Don't say them to anyone else. I wasn't planning to. I know. I'm saying it anyway. She looked at him across the kitchen counter, in the early morning light that came through the east-facing window, and she thought about a room full of powerful people who fell silent when he walked in, and about an old woman gasping back to life, and about 4 words that had been in her head for 11 days and weren't leaving. Kane, she said. His name felt strange, direct and strange, like making eye contact with something that wasn't used to it. He waited. Whoever came into my apartment, are they going to come back? He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. I see, she said. She finished the coffee. She picked up her bag. The driver was downstairs in 9 minutes, and he didn't speak to her, which was fine. She had nothing to say to anyone at 6:15 in the morning after 2 hours of sleep and the complete dismantling of the story she'd been telling herself about how her life and soul worked. She made it through the cafe shift. She smiled at customers. She made Americanos and poured milk in the precise rotation that produced the right foam texture, and she answered a coworker's question about weekend plans with something that was technically true and said nothing. At noon, she got a text from a number she didn't recognize. No greeting, just, "Damien Crowe knows your name." She stood in the back room of the cafe holding her phone and breathing. Then a second text, 30 seconds later. "He knows your father's name, too." She sat down on the step stool next to the cleaning supply shelf and held the phone in both hands and breathed slowly and deliberately, the way she'd learned to breathe in the nursing program when things in front of her were serious and falling apart was not an option. Her father's name. Ray Whitmore, 63, dialysis 3 times a week at Columbus Regional. The step stool was uncomfortable. The cleaning supplies smelled like bleach and something citrus. Somewhere beyond the door, her coworker was saying something cheerful to a customer about the weather. She called Kane. He picked up on the first ring this time. "I got a message," she said, "from a number I don't know. It says Damien Crowe knows my father's name." A silence on the line that lasted exactly long enough for her to understand that this was not a surprise to him, and was also worse than he'd expected it to be this fast. "Where are you?" he said. "Work. I finish at 2. Don't go home after. Come back here." "Kane." She stopped. She pressed her back against the shelf behind her and looked at the water-stained ceiling of the back room of a cafe in Seoul and thought about how thin the distance was, apparently between a person's ordinary life and the point at which that life was no longer recognizable. "He's going to use my father," she said. "He's going to try." "What does that mean, try?" "It means I won't let him." She wanted to ask how. She wanted the mechanics of the certainty, the specific architecture of how a man who frightened rooms said, "I won't let him," and meant it. She wanted something concrete to hold because the step stool was hard, and the bleach smell was sharp, and her hands were doing a thing she didn't like, a faint vibration at the fingertips that she recognized as the body getting ahead of the mind. "Elena," his voice, level. "Breathe." "I am breathing." "Slower." She breathed slower. 2 o'clock, he said. "Come back. We deal with this together." She sat there for another 60 seconds after the call ended. Then she stood up. She straightened her apron. She went back out through the door and resumed the afternoon shift, because there were still 2 hours left and the customers still needed their coffee, and nothing about collapsing in a back room was going to help her father or herself or the situation she was in. She was still managing. She just wasn't sure anymore what she was managing toward. At 1:58, 4 minutes before her shift ended, a man she'd never seen before walked into the cafe, sat at the counter, and ordered nothing. He looked at her once. Just once. Long enough to make sure she'd registered him. Then he looked away and waited. She understood, with a cold and absolute clarity she felt in her back teeth, that he hadn't come for coffee. He'd come to make sure she knew she'd been found. Part 3. The Weight of What You Know. Upam. The man at the counter didn't order anything. He just sat there with his hands flat on the surface and looked at Elena one more time. Not threatening, not aggressive, just the steady, patient look of someone completing a task. A confirmation. He'd been sent to make sure she saw him, and she had, and now his job was done. He left at 2:15 without speaking to anyone. Elena finished her shift. She counted the till with her coworker, a 22-year-old named Subin, who was telling her something about a concert she'd attended over the weekend, and Elena nodded at the right intervals and made the right sounds, and her hands did the counting automatically, while the rest of her brain was back at the counter, watching the man's hands on the surface, flat and still. Professional hands. Hands that were used to waiting. The car Kane had arranged was parked outside. Different driver from this morning, same car, same quality of silence. Elena got in and didn't speak, and watched the city move past the window, and thought about what it meant that someone had sent a person specifically to be seen, not to act, not to threaten out loud, just to exist in her line of sight long enough to deliver the message that she had no corners left to stand in that they didn't know about. She arrived at the Hannam Dong building at 2:40. The elevator required the card and she didn't have one, but the lobby was no longer empty. A woman she hadn't seen before, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, in a jacket that suggested she was not hired for decorative purposes, acknowledged her and called up without being asked. Kane met her at the elevator on the 27th floor. He read her face before she said anything. "The cafe," he said. "Someone came in, sat at the counter, didn't order, looked at me and left." She set her bag down. "It wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration. They wanted me to know they could find me anywhere I went." "Yes." "This is Damien's doing." "Yes." She took a breath. "I want the full version now, not the version where you give me what I need to not panic. The actual version." He studied her. Whatever he was looking for, he found it, because he turned toward the main room and she followed him in. Shin was at the table again, and this time there was a third person, a woman, younger, maybe late 20s, with Kane's jaw and none of his containment. She was sitting with her arms crossed and her eyes on Elena the moment she walked in, with an expression that was not hostile but was measuring the distance between its options. "My sister," Kane said. "Yuna," Yuna said in English with less formality than Sheen's. "You're the waitress." "I was," Elena said. "I don't think that's still the most relevant thing about me." Something shifted in Yuna's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. She uncrossed her arms. Kane sat. Elena sat across from him. Shin remained standing, which she'd noticed was his preference. A man who liked to be able to move quickly, which told you something about how he'd spent his years. "Park Chae-won," Kane said. "You heard his name and an account number. What you don't know is what the account is for." He paused. 4 months ago, a coalition of 3 government ministers and 2 private sector financiers began moving money offshore. Not unusual on its own. What's unusual is the destination and the purpose. The funds are being staged for a specific transaction, the purchase of influence over a series of contract awards for a national infrastructure project worth approximately $40 billion over 7 years. Elena kept her face level. Corruption. At a scale that hasn't been attempted in this country in 20 years. And Park Jae-won is the architect. He designed the movement structure, the account chain, the timing. If it's discovered before the transaction completes, everyone involved faces prison. If it completes, they're untouchable. And Damien Crowe? Kane's jaw set. Damien is not part of the coalition. He discovered it independently, the same way you did, accidentally. But unlike you, he understood immediately what he had. He has been holding it over the coalition for 6 weeks, extracting concessions in exchange for his silence. Blackmail. Effectively, Elena absorbed this. So there are multiple groups of people who want this kept quiet. The coalition, and Damien, who wants to keep milking the coalition. And anyone who surfaces the account number threatens both of them. Which is why your apartment was searched, Shin said. Damien moved first because he's faster and more paranoid. He wants to know if you're a threat to his position, not just to the coalition's. And the coalition, do they know about me? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Kane, she said. We believe they were informed this morning, he said. The room was very quiet. So now there are 2 separate organizations of dangerous people who know my name, she said. Yes. She sat with that. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul was doing what it always did, being enormous and continuous and entirely indifferent to the specific human problem happening 27 floors above one of its streets. She'd always found the city's scale comforting before. It made invisibility feel possible. She understood now that invisibility was not a condition you achieved. It was a condition you were granted, and it could be revoked. My father, she said. We've arranged additional security at Columbus Regional, Kane said. It was in place by 9 this morning. She looked at him. You did that without telling me. I did it before you called me, when I understood how quickly Damien was moving. She sat with that too. You were ahead of this. I was trying to be. Trying. She heard the word she'd chosen and let it sit there. Yuna from across the table said quietly, "He hasn't slept." "Yuna," Kane said. "She should know that." Yuna kept her eyes on Elena. "He's been managing this since 4 in the morning. He knew Damien was moving on you before you woke up. He didn't wake you because you'd slept 2 hours and there was nothing you could do before 6. Elena looked at Kane. He said nothing, which was becoming a reliable confirmation method. "Okay," she said. She pressed her palms flat on the table, a gesture she recognized as her own mechanism for centering. Physical pressure, something solid. "What are our options?" Shin moved to the tablet on the counter and set it in front of her. Option 1. You leave Seoul, tonight, ideally. We arrange travel documents, a new temporary identity, a location outside reach. You go to your father. This ends your exposure to the immediate danger but does not resolve it. Damien knows who you are now, and information doesn't expire. So I'm in a different city being afraid instead of this one. Reduced risk, not eliminated. Option 2, Kane said. He looked at her steadily. You stay. We deal with Damien directly, and we deal with the Coalition's awareness of you. It's more dangerous in the short term. It's the only option that actually ends the problem. And how do we deal with them? The account number you carry in your head, Kane said, is evidence. The kind that, if it reached the right hands, a specific prosecutor's office, a specific journalist, a coordinated release, would destroy the Coalition's plan and remove Damien's leverage simultaneously. He can't blackmail people whose corruption is already public. She understood. You want to use what I heard. I want to give you the choice of using it. But you'd need me to testify or give a statement or be on record. Or be present when the information is provided through a channel that doesn't require your name, Shin said. There are ways, but none of them are risk-free. No, Kane said. None of them are. She looked at him. And option 3? Silence. There has to be an option 3, she said. You've left something out. Yuna looked at her brother. The look was brief and complicated and carried the weight of a conversation that had already happened somewhere Elena wasn't. Tell me, Elena said. Kane stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room for a moment, and Elena watched the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands, hanging at his sides, were very still in the way that hands are still when their owner is holding something carefully. There's a way to make you permanently untouchable, he said, by both groups, a position so protected that neither Damien nor the Coalition would be able to move against you without direct consequences to themselves. She waited. He turned around. Marriage. She heard the word. She processed it. She put it in the correct category in her mind. Real, spoken, in this room, by this person. And then she said, say that again. If you were my wife, Kane said, you would be under the full protection of every alliance I hold. Moving against you would mean moving against me and every connected interest in this city. Damien is reckless, not suicidal. The Coalition operates on calculation, not courage. Neither would risk it. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when something too large for immediate response enters a room. Elena stood up. She pushed her chair back and walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at the 6-burner range for approximately 10 seconds, which was what she needed to not say something she'd regret. Then she turned around. I was a waitress serving you dinner 3 weeks ago, she said. I know. I don't know you. You don't know me. You know my father's medical schedule and my bank balance and the fact that I organize my drawers by frequency of use. That's not knowing me. No, he said. It's not. So what is this, Kane? What is this actually? He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was not evasion. She was beginning to understand the difference. It's the only option that protects you completely and immediately. It's also... He stopped. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the calculation behind his eyes gave way to something that had less structure and more exposure. It's also what I want. Yuna made a small sound that wasn't quite a sound. Shin looked at the ceiling. Elena looked at Kane. Because of the restaurant. Because of everything since the restaurant, he said. Because you looked at me and saw a person making a bad choice and you made a better one in front of him. Because you refused my money. Because you told me looking into you was a violation and you were right. Because you've spent 14 months in a foreign country holding your life together with both hands for someone else's sake, and you've never once asked anyone to acknowledge that it was hard. He paused. Because I have been surrounded for 15 years by people who see what I control, and you saw what I was doing wrong. The kitchen was very quiet. That's a lot to put on 4 conversations and a near-death experience at a restaurant, she said. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it would mean to say yes. Not just the protection, not just the strategic logic that even she could see was real. If Kane Voss considered her his, no one in the city would touch her, and she understood that with a cold clarity that had nothing romantic in it. She thought about what it would mean to bind herself to a life she hadn't chosen, in a world whose rules she was still learning in real time. She thought about her father's name in a text message from a stranger. I have conditions, she said. Something in Kane released, barely visible, like a cable under tension losing a fraction of its load. Tell me. I keep my life. I keep working toward culinary school. I don't disappear into whatever this is. She gestured at the room, the building, the 27 floors of it. I speak my mind. I'm not managed. I'm not told what to wear or who to talk to or how to behave in public. I don't become an accessory. Yes, he said, without hesitation. And you're honest with me. Not strategic honest. Actually honest. I will try, he said. That one is harder. I know, she said. Try anyway. She stood there in the kitchen of a penthouse that wasn't hers, in a life that had become unrecognizable in less than 3 weeks, and she thought about endurance versus change and whether they were actually opposites or just different expressions of the same survival instinct. And she said, okay. Then Shin's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face, which was not a demonstrative face, went somewhere very specific that Elena had no reference for, but that made the back of her neck tighten. He said, in Korean, 3 words. She caught 2 of them. Kane crossed the room in 3 steps. He took the phone. He listened for 10 seconds. He said something short and precise in Korean, handed the phone back, and stood for a moment with his hand at his side. What? Elena said. He looked at her. The security we placed at Columbus Regional. She felt her entire body go cold. Your father is fine, he said immediately. He's safe. He's inside and accounted for. But someone approached the facility 2 hours ago, not to enter, to be seen. The same play as the cafe. He paused. Damien is accelerating his timeline. He's not waiting to see what you decide. He's applying pressure to force the decision. She stood absolutely still. He knows you're here, Shin said. He has to at this point, which means he knows you're considering. He's trying to cut off the option before I take it, Elena said. Yes, she looked at Kane. If I agree. If we move forward with what you're proposing. How long before it's enough protection to matter? How long before my father's name is off the table? Kane's jaw was tight. Days, not weeks. The announcement alone. Could you do it tonight? A pause. There's a way, Yuna said from the table, where she'd been very quiet. The Voss family has a formal event Thursday. It's already planned, already public-facing. If Kane arrived with a fiancée, if there were photos, if the right people in the right networks knew by morning, it would be faster than a private arrangement. Thursday is tomorrow, Elena said. Yes, Yuna said. Elena looked at Kane. He looked back at her, and he was not asking her to move faster than she could. He was waiting the way he'd waited through every conversation they'd had, with the patience of a man who had stopped expecting anything and was therefore very careful with the things he actually wanted. My father gets a phone call tonight, she said. From me. Not from a security team. Me. Of course. And someone stays at that hospital. Already arranged. And nobody tells me what to say tomorrow night. I wouldn't dare, he said. She breathed. The city outside was going orange with late afternoon light, the Han River catching it somewhere to the west. The kind of light that made Seoul look, briefly, like a place you could be safe in if you were careful. She was learning that careful wasn't enough. But she wasn't the kind of person who stopped because enough wasn't available. All right, she said. Tomorrow. She called her father at 7 that evening. He picked up on the third ring, his voice carrying the specific weight of a man who'd spent the day moving slowly between waiting rooms and monitoring equipment, the kind of tired that lived in your bones now. "Elle," he said, "wasn't expecting you until Sunday." "I know." She was sitting in the spare room with the east-facing window, her back against the headboard, her knees pulled up. "I needed to hear your voice. You okay?" "I'm fine," she said. And then, because her father had raised her to be the kind of person who said the true thing, even when it was complicated. "I'm in something complicated, Dad, but I'm okay. There are people making sure you're okay, too." A pause. She could hear the television in the background. The evening news, she guessed, the specific murmur of it. "What kind of complicated?" he said. "The kind I can handle." Another pause. Then, in the voice he'd used since she was 9 years old and had decided to fix the garage door herself and ended up taking it off the track. "You sure?" "Not completely," she said, "but I'm working on it." He laughed, low and tired. "That's my girl." She sat there after the call with the phone in her lap and breathed. The spare room was quiet. Somewhere beyond the door, she could hear the building's ventilation system and, distantly, Yuna's voice, and then silence. She didn't sleep well. She didn't expect to. At 6 the next morning, Yuna knocked on her door with coffee and, without preamble, a black dress on a hanger that was simple and precise and worth more than Elena's monthly rent. "You'll need something," Yuna said, "for tonight." Elena looked at the dress. She thought about the peeling shoe from Lumiere and the second-hand market stall near Hongik University, and the 14 months of managed invisibility. "I'm not becoming a different person," she said. "I know," Yuna said. "That's why I picked that one. It looks like you chose it yourself." Elena took the dress. At 4 that afternoon, Shin came to the main room with his tablet and his expression that communicated information before his mouth did. Kane was at the counter. Elena was on the sofa reading the culinary school application she'd opened again, just to look at it, just to remind herself what she was actually building toward underneath all of this. "Damien made contact," Shin said. Kane set down his coffee. "He's requesting a meeting, tonight, before the event." Shin looked at his tablet. "He says he has a proposition. He says if Kane comes alone, he'll consider releasing his pressure on Miss Whitmore's family." "He won't," Kane said. "No," Shin agreed. "He won't. But he wants you isolated before you arrive with her in public. If you're at a meeting with Damien at 9, you can't be at the event at 9. She arrives without you, without the protection of the public announcement. And then—" "He has her without a shield," Elena said. Both men looked at her. She'd set down the culinary school application. She was looking at Shin. "That's the play. He wants Kane out of position before I go public. If Kane's in a meeting, I'm exposed. If Kane skips the meeting, Damien leaks something that destabilizes the announcement before it lands." She paused. "It's not a proposition. It's a trap set on both ends." Shin looked at Kane. Something passed between them. Not surprise, but a kind of recalibration. The adjustment that happens when a variable in a plan turns out to be more than you'd accounted for. "Yes," Shin said quietly. Kane looked at Elena. "You saw that fast." "I've been watching how this works for 3 days," she said. "And I've spent 14 months learning to see the shape of a situation before it closes on me." She stood up. "We don't do either option. We don't go to the meeting, and we don't wait for him to leak whatever he has. We go tonight, we go together, we arrive early, and we make sure the right people know about it before Damien can position his counter. You said days, not weeks. Start the clock now." The room was quiet. Then Shin said, "That requires moving the announcement 2 hours forward and alerting 3 separate contacts in the next 90 minutes. Can you do that?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. She picked up the black dress from the chair where she'd draped it. "Then I need 45 minutes. She was in the bathroom, water running, when she heard Shin's voice through the door. Rapid, Korean, the particular cadence of a man who was very good at his job and had just been given a reason to be better than usual. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same scar above the left eyebrow, Same eyes with the specific weight of a person who had been managing for a long time. She thought, this is the part where you decide whether you are still the same person or whether that's even the right question. She turned off the water. She put on the dress. It fit like it had been waiting for her, which she refused to find significant. When she came out, Kane was in the main room in a dark suit, standing at the window, looking at the city the way she'd seen him look at rooms. Quick, complete, calculating the exits. He heard her and turned. He looked at her. Not the way he'd looked at her at Lumiere, not the early careful reading a situation look. Something different, something that had fewer exits in it. You look like yourself, he said. I am myself, she said. I know, he said. That's what I meant. They left at 7:15. The elevator descended. The lobby was empty except for the sharp-eyed woman who acknowledged them with the same minimal gesture as before. The car was waiting. Elena got in. Kane got in beside her. The door closed. And somewhere across the city, in a building she'd never been in, a man named Damien Crow looked at the alert on his phone. The one that told him Kane Voss and an unknown woman had just left the Hanamdong building 2 hours ahead of his planned timeline, and understood for the first time that he had miscalculated something. He didn't know yet what. He would figure it out soon. But the car was already moving, and Elena Whitmore was already too far down a road with no reverse gear, and the city was lighting up around them like it always did, like it did for everyone, regardless of what they were driving toward. And she pressed her hands flat against her thighs, that centering pressure, that small, solid thing, and looked forward through the windshield at Seoul opening up ahead of them. She had stopped being a waitress somewhere in the last 72 hours. She wasn't sure yet what she was instead, but she was going to find out. The venue was called the Meridian. It occupied the top 3 floors of a tower in Gangnam that had been built to impress people who were difficult to impress, and it had succeeded, mostly because the architect had understood that real power didn't announce itself with ornamentation. It announced itself with space. The main hall was enormous and spare, all dark glass and cold light, and the kind of silence that expensive acoustics could produce even in a room with 200 people in it. Elena had never been inside. She'd walked past the building twice in 14 months without thinking about it. She thought about it now. The car pulled into the private entrance at 7:41. She knew because she looked at her watch. A small habit, timing things, keeping herself anchored to intervals when everything else was moving too fast. 7:41. 2 hours and 19 minutes before Damien's planned timeline. The asymmetry was the only advantage they had. Shin was in the follow car. He'd made the 3 calls in 80 minutes, which had been impressive and which she had decided not to acknowledge because he was not the kind of man who wanted to be told he'd done well by someone he was still deciding about. Kane got out first. He offered his hand and she took it, and his grip was dry and even and carried the particular steadiness of a man who had learned a long time ago that the body could be controlled even when the mind was working at capacity. She filed that away. She could use that. The entrance had 2 men she didn't know who acknowledged Kane with the minimal language of people who reported to him, and a woman in evening dress who was the event's coordinator and who looked at Elena once professionally, cataloged everything about her in under 3 seconds, and said, "Mr. Voss, your table is prepared. The announcement window opens at 8:15 per the updated instruction." "Thank you," Kane said. They moved inside. The room was filling. The composition of the crowd was the same as Lumiere's. Not identical people, but the same taxonomy. Power in its various expressions. Some of them political, some financial, some the harder kind that didn't have a clean category on an organizational chart. Elena moved through it beside Kane and felt the attention shift toward them in the way attention shifts when something unexpected enters a familiar system. Not hostile, not welcoming, just calibrating. She kept her chin level, her back straight, her hands, which wanted to find something to carry, empty at her sides. Kane leaned slightly toward her without turning his head. 3 o'clock. The man in the gray suit with the silver tie. That's Minister Cho. He's part of the coalition. She didn't look immediately. She counted 2 steps and then let her gaze move naturally to the right in a long arc that landed on the man for less than a second. Older, maybe 65, the face of someone who had spent decades learning to look at nothing in particular. "Does he know who I am?" she said, The same way she'd say anything at a normal event, volume calibrated for the ambient noise. "He'll know in 34 minutes, Kane said. They sat. The table was near the center of the room, not the power position at the far end, not the edge, visible from most angles. She understood that was deliberate. Una arrived at 8:02. She sat across from Elena and looked at her in a way that asked a question without asking it. "I'm fine," Elena said. "You look it," Una said, which from Una, Elena was beginning to understand, was high register. The first course arrived. Elena ate because not eating was a decision the body would bill her for later, and she was going to need everything her body had tonight. The food was good. She noticed that in the precise way she noticed the range at the penthouse, professionally, at a slight remove from everything else that was happening. At 8:11, Shin appeared at the edge of the room and caught Kane's eye. A small, contained gesture. Something had moved. Kane said quietly, "Give me a moment," and he pushed back from the table and walked toward the side corridor, unhurried, the way he moved through every space, like he had already paid for it. Elena watched him go. She looked at Una. "He's been doing this his whole life," Una said, "checking perimeters, even at family dinners, even at—" She stopped. "It used to drive our mother insane." Elena kept her expression even. The mother. He'd mentioned her briefly that first night in the car. The only person who'd believed he could be better, who he'd lost. She didn't push. Some things weren't hers to open yet. "What was she like?" she said. Una looked at her plate for a moment. "Stubborn," she said. "Not afraid of him even when everyone else was. She used to say that fear was the laziest way to earn respect." Elena thought about that. "She sounds like she'd have had opinions about this whole situation," Elena said. Una almost smiled. "She'd have said you were either very smart or very stupid, and that there wasn't much space between them." "Which would she have bet on?" Una looked at her directly. "Smart," she said. "She had good instincts." Kane came back at 8:14. He sat. He looked at Elena, and his expression told her something was wrong before his words did. "Damien didn't wait for 9, he said. Below the ambient noise of the room, below even close eavesdropping range. He moved as soon as the car left the building. He sent someone to the hospital. The table went very still. "My father," Elena said. One flat sentence. "He's safe. He's been moved to a private room with 2 of our people inside. Damien's person hasn't entered the facility." He held her gaze. "But this is a message. He's telling us he moved faster than we thought he could. What does he want?" He called Shin directly. "He wants you, not as leverage anymore. He wants you out of this city, out of this situation, and he wants it tonight. He says if you leave Seoul voluntarily before the announcement, he'll pull back from your father and from any public disclosure of what you heard." Elena looked at the table, at the white cloth and the half-eaten course and the crystal glass with its careful measure of water. "And if I stay?" Kane's jaw was tight. "Then he escalates." "To what?" "He didn't specify." She looked up. "He didn't specify because he wants me to imagine it." "Yes." She breathed in slowly. She thought about the man at the cafe counter with his flat, patient hands. She thought about the apartment drawer facing the wrong way. She thought about Damien Crow somewhere in this city. She'd looked him up on Shin's tablet that afternoon, found the careful public face of a businessman, the suit and smile profile of someone who understood how to be invisible in the right registers. And she thought about the fact that he had sent someone to stand outside her father's hospital, specifically timed to this moment. He was very good at knowing when people were most afraid. She picked up her water glass. She took a drink. She set it down. "Do the announcement," she said. "Elena?" "Now." Not 8:15. Now. She looked at Kane. "He moved up his timeline. We move up ours. He sent someone to that hospital because he wants me scared and silent before our names are public together, so we make them public before he expects it." She paused. "Do it." Kane held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Shin, who was watching from the corridor, and made a single small gesture. Shin turned and moved. What happened next took 4 minutes and felt like a different unit of time entirely. Shin spoke to the event coordinator. The coordinator went to the sound system. a gentle orchestration of moving parts that, from the outside, looked like a minor adjustment to the evening's schedule. Then the room's ambient music lowered and a voice, the coordinator, smooth and practiced, said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief announcement from Mr. Kane Voss." The room shifted. 200 people with varying degrees of interest or wariness turned toward the center table, and Kane stood, and Elena stood beside him, and she felt the attention land on her with the particular weight of a room full of people recalibrating simultaneously. Kane didn't reach for a microphone. His voice carried without it. "I'll be brief. I want to introduce Elena Whitmore. She'll be joining my family." He paused exactly one beat. "My fiancée." The room's silence was the specific kind that follows information that is too large and too unexpected to produce an immediate social response. Elena stood in it with her back straight and her hands still, and her face the face of someone who had decided to be exactly who she was in front of a room full of people who didn't know what to do with that. She looked at Minister Cho. He was looking at her. His expression had not moved, but something behind his eyes had changed very quickly and then locked down again, and she thought about what Kane had said. They operate on calculation, not courage. And she thought, "You're doing the math right now, and the math is not good for you. Good." Then her phone vibrated. She didn't take it out. She kept her face forward for the 30 seconds it took for the room to resume its normal operating sounds. Conversation, the careful repositioning of reactions. Then she sat, and under the table she looked at the screen. Unknown number, a photo. Her father's face. Not harmed, not in crisis. Just her father, sitting in his dialysis chair, looking tired the way he always looked, the hospital blanket pulled up, the monitor behind him showing steady numbers. Below the photo, one line of text. He looks comfortable. For now. She turned the phone face down on her thigh. She breathed. She breathed again. Then she looked at Kane and said very quietly, "We need to move faster." He'd seen her face. "Show me." She angled the screen toward him under the edge of the table. He looked at the photo for 2 seconds. His face didn't change, but his right hand, which had been resting near the table's edge, closed into something that was very controlled and very deliberate. And she understood that controlled and deliberate was how he expressed what other people expressed by putting their fist through something. Shin was at the table in 40 seconds. Kane showed him the phone. Shin stepped back and made a call that lasted 90 seconds, during which his face was completely expressionless, in the way a face is expressionless when it's been trained to show nothing during operational conversations. He came back and said, "Columbus Regional has been secured. Additional personnel, inside and outside. The man watching was photographed and identified. He's Damien's mid-level, not a specialist. He's been told through the appropriate channel that his continued presence constitutes a federal-level problem." "Will that hold?" Elena said. "For long enough," Shin said. "Long enough for what?" Shin looked at Kane. Kane said, "For us to end this tonight." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "Damien has one piece of leverage, the account number, what you heard." He kept his voice level, kept his eyes on her. "If that information goes public tonight, not through us, not through a channel connected to me, through the journalist Damien has been avoiding for 6 months, who has been chasing the coalition story with half the evidence she needs, if she gets the account number and enough context to make it actionable. Damien's blackmail evaporates," Elena said, "because he can't threaten to release what's already been released." She sat with that. "And the coalition?" "The coalition faces a prosecutor's inquiry that will occupy them entirely for the foreseeable future. They will not have the capacity or the motivation to focus on a woman in Seoul who happened to overhear a number." He paused. "They'll have significantly larger problems." "And Damien himself." "Without leverage, Damien has nothing. He's been using this information as currency for 6 weeks. Without it, he's a man who committed extortion against government ministers and has no protection against the people he was extorting." Elena thought about that for a moment. "He becomes the problem instead of us." "Yes." "This journalist, is she legitimate?" "Her name is Park Soo-yeon. She's been published in 4 international outlets. She's been working this story from the infrastructure contracts end. She's missing the financial architecture, the account chain, the mechanism." He paused. She's here tonight, actually. She was invited as press before any of this was in motion. Elena looked at him. That's convenient. It is, he said, without elaboration. She heard the non-elaboration and decided to let it exist. There were things Kane had arranged that she would understand later and things she would choose not to examine too closely, and she was learning to distinguish between them. If I talk to her, Elena said, I'm on record. Somewhere, even if my name isn't attached. Yes. And that's a risk that doesn't go away. No, he said, it doesn't. She sat back in her chair and looked at the room around her, at the 200 people navigating the social geometry of an event that had just shifted significantly on its axis. At Minister Cho, who was now in quiet conversation with a man Elena didn't recognize, the body language of the conversation tight and controlled. At the event coordinator, who was managing the room's recalibration with the professional grace of someone who had managed difficult moments before. At the room's exits, the two to the left, the one at the rear, the service entrance beside the kitchen. She thought, 14 months ago I got on a plane with 2 bags and a nursing school dropout's resume and a culinary school application and the conviction that building something required going somewhere it didn't exist yet. She thought, I have been managing toward something for a long time, and this is not what I was managing toward. She thought, but here it is anyway. Where is she? Elena said. Shin's gaze moved across the room with the precision of a search tool. North end, near the bar. Dark green dress. Alone. Elena stood up. Kane stood immediately. Elena, I'll be right back, she said. His hand caught her wrist. Not hard, not restraining, just contact. She looked down at his hand and then up at his face. You don't have to be the one, he said. The account number is in my head, she said. Not yours, not Shin's, mine. She looked at him steadily. And she needs to hear it from a source, from someone who was there. A second-hand relay doesn't hold the same way. She felt his grip, still not restraining, just present. Just the weight of someone who was holding something carefully without wanting to hold it. 3 minutes, she said. I'll be at the bar. She walked across the room. Park Soo-yeon was early 30s, compact, with the particular stillness of someone who spent a lot of time listening in rooms and had learned to make herself easy to overlook. She was looking at her phone when Elena arrived beside her at the bar, and she looked up with the automatic social neutrality of a person interrupted at an event. Then she registered Elena's face, the woman who'd just been announced. She recalibrated quickly, a journalist's fast processing visible in the micro-adjustment of her expression. Miss Park, Elena said, in English, which was a choice and they both understood it. Ms. Whitmore, Park Soo-yeon said. Congratulations on your announcement. Careful, professional, waiting. Thank you. Elena ordered water from the bar. She waited for it. She took a sip. She set it down and turned slightly so that her back was angled away from most of the room. Not conspicuously, just the natural shift of someone having a quiet conversation at an event. I understand you've been working on the infrastructure contract story, Elena said. A pause that lasted exactly the right length. It's a significant public interest piece, Park Soo-yeon said. I have something that might be useful to you, Elena said. An account number, and a name and some context about their relationship. But the journalist's stillness changed quality. Still external, but internally something had leaned forward at significant velocity. I'd need to understand your source position, Park Soo-yeon said. Measured, professional. Accidental witness, Elena said. Wrong place, right moment. Not affiliated with anyone named in the story. A pause. Verifiably not affiliated. Park Soo-yeon looked at her for 2 seconds. 3. The look of someone running probability calculations at speed. I'd need to verify the number independently, she said. You'll be able to, Elena said. She said the account number, she said the name, she said 3 additional details about the timing and the location of the conversation she'd overheard, enough to triangulate, enough to make it not just a number floating in air, but a number connected to a physical moment with verifiable elements. Park Soo-yeon did not write any of it down. She was memorizing it, Elena realized, the same way Elena had memorized it without intending to. The journalist equivalent of the culinary train memory. You learn to hold things without a net because the net wasn't always available. This goes to press how quickly, Elena said. If what you've given me is what I think it is, I can have something online in 4 hours, Park Soo-yeon said. I have the supporting structure. I've been waiting for the keystone. 4 hours, Elena said. 3 if I skip the second verification step. Don't skip it, Elena said. Do it right. Park Soo-yeon looked at her for a moment with an expression Elena couldn't fully classify, but which felt like, briefly, something that wasn't professional. You know, this creates a significant problem for several very powerful people. That's the point, Elena said. She picked up her water. She walked back across the room. Kane watched her the entire way. She sat down and he looked at her and she said quietly, 4 hours. Something shifted in his face. Not relief. Something quieter and more specific than relief. Then Shin's phone went off. Not a call. A series of alerts, rapid, successive, the sound of a system responding to multiple inputs at once. Shin looked at the screen, and the particular quality of his stillness changed in a way Elena had learned to read in 3 days. Not alarm, but engagement, the shift into operational mode. Damien is here, Shin said. The table went completely still. In the building? Kane said. Arrived 4 minutes ago. Service entrance. Shin's voice was level, but moving fast. He has 4 people with him. They're in the lower corridor. Elena felt her pulse in her throat. Not panic. Something colder and more specific than panic. The recognition that the timeline had just been overridden by someone who had also decided not to wait. He knows about the journalist, Kane said. It wasn't a question. He has eyes in this room, Shin said. He's been monitoring the guest list. Kane stood. Not fast. Controlled. The movement of a man who had decided something and was now executing it. Get Yuna out, he said to Shin. Kane, Yuna said. Now, he said. The single word carried no anger, just wait. He looked at Elena. Stay at this table. Do not move from this table until I come back. What are you going to do? Talk to him. 4 people, Kane. I know. He looked at her, and for a fraction of a second the calculation was fully offline, and what was there instead was something unguarded and specific and directed entirely at her. I'll come back. That's not... Elena. He said her name the way he'd said it the first time on the phone in her apartment building lobby. Like he'd been saying it longer than he should have. Stay at the table. He turned and walked toward the service corridor. She sat. She counted. She got to 40 before Shin, returning without Yuna, appeared at her shoulder and said, very quietly, We have a problem. She looked up. Damien's people came in through the service entrance, Shin said. But Damien himself came in through the main entrance. He split his approach. She processed this. He's not in the lower corridor. No. Then where? He's been in the room for 11 minutes, Shin said. He was here before we knew he was in the building. She felt the cold settle. And Kane is in the lower corridor, she said. Yes. Looking for someone who isn't there. Yes. She understood it then, the full shape of it, the way the pieces fit. Damien had split his entrance because he'd known they would respond to the service entrance alert. He'd known because he had eyes in this room, and he'd sent the alert on purpose to move Kane out of position, away from Elena. She turned in her chair. He was standing 12 feet away. She knew him from the photo she'd studied on Shin's tablet that afternoon. The public-facing businessman, the careful suit. In person, he was thinner than the photos, with the specific thinness of someone who didn't eat when things were in motion. And his eyes were the eyes of a person who had made a considerable number of decisions that required not thinking about them afterward. Damien Crowe looked at her across 12 feet of expensive flooring and said, Miss Whitmore, you've had quite a week. Shin moved forward and Damien's hand came up, a gesture, a signal. And from 2 directions Elena became aware of the other presences, the people who had not come through the service entrance, the ones placed in advance, who had been in this room before any of them. Shin stopped. Damien walked toward her, unhurried, with the relaxed precision of someone who had already run this scenario and found the ending satisfactory. I had a simple request, he said. Leave. That was it. Leave this city, leave this situation, and everything involving your father and your modest little life in Ohio becomes a non-issue. He reached the chair across from her, Kane's chair. And he didn't sit. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking down at her with the expression of a man who was accustomed to people being smaller problems than they imagined themselves to be. But you had to be brave. She looked at him. Her pulse was loud and high, and her hands were flat on the table and she was not moving them. "Where is Kane?" she said. "Occupied," he said. "For now. Your people in the lower corridor. They'll keep him busy long enough." He tilted his head. "You talked to Park Soo-yeon." The room around them was continuing to function. People talking, glasses moving, the ambient machinery of an expensive event. Because no one in this room wanted to be seen noticing what was happening at the center table, which was its own kind of cover. "Whatever you said to her," Damien said, "it doesn't matter. She won't publish it." "Why not?" "Because in about 20 minutes, she's going to receive information suggesting that her source has a personal interest in the outcome of this story, which constitutes a significant journalistic conflict." He paused. "The information will be false, but it will require verification, and verification takes time, and time is the one thing you don't have tonight." She looked at him. She kept her face level. She thought, he's very good at this. She thought he's also been talking for 2 minutes, which means there's something he needs from this conversation, which means he doesn't have everything he wants yet. "What do you actually want?" she said. He looked at her, recalibrating slightly. "From me," she said. "Not from Kane, not from the coalition. From me, specifically, because you've been maneuvering me for 4 days, and you could have moved directly on my father any time in those 4 days, and you didn't, which means you need me to do something, and you need me to do it voluntarily." Damien's expression did something she didn't expect. It shifted briefly into something that was almost respect, the automatic response of a person who encounters an accurate assessment and can't help but acknowledge it. "The account number," he said. "I need you to tell me how you remember it." She stared at him. "You heard it once," he said, "in a corridor, in ambient noise, and you retained it perfectly." He paused. "The version I have has an error in the 7th digit. I've been working with incomplete information for 6 weeks. The coalition knows there's an error. They've been using that error as a stalling mechanism, claiming the account doesn't exist in the form I've presented." He paused. "You heard the correct version." The table was very still. "So you don't actually have leverage," she said slowly. "You have a defective version of leverage. You've been maintaining a performance of control for 6 weeks on a foundation with a crack in it." He said nothing, which was its own answer. "And if I give you the correct number, you can resume your extortion operation, and you no longer need me to leave Seoul or stay silent, because I can't threaten an information advantage you've already fully monetized." She looked at him. "That's what you're offering." "A clean exit for you," he said, "and continued business for me. Everyone returns to their previous position." She thought about Park Soo-yeon 11 feet away at the bar, not writing anything down. She thought about 4 hours. She thought about her father's face in the photo, the hospital blanket, the steady numbers on the monitor. She looked at Damien Crowe across the table and she said, "No." His eyes changed. "No?" he said. "No," she said. "I won't give you the number. I won't leave Seoul. And whatever you sent to Park Soo-yeon's inbox, she's going to verify it and find nothing, because there's nothing to find. And then she's going to publish what I gave her, and your extortion operation is going to become very public very fast." He looked at her for a long moment. The relaxed precision was still there in his posture, but something behind his eyes was running fast, urgent, rewriting conclusions. "You understand what I can do," he said. "You can threaten my father," she said. "You've been threatening my father for 4 days and you haven't touched him, because touching him is a line you can't uncross and you know it. You've been using the threat because the actual action costs you more than the implication does." She held his gaze. "You're very good at implications. You're not good at me." His jaw tightened by a fraction. Behind him, at the room's far edge, she saw the service door open. Kane came through it with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had moved through whatever was in the lower corridor and come out the other side, and she could see from 12 feet and 45 degrees of angle that his jacket was wrong, pulled at the shoulder where someone had grabbed it, and there was a mark on his jaw that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. He scanned the room in under 2 seconds and found her at the table and found Damien standing over her, and the calculation in his face completed instantaneously, and he began walking toward them with the specific quality of movement that wasn't fast because fast would clear the room, and he didn't want the room cleared. He wanted this to happen the way it needed to happen, which was controlled and final, and without the collateral of 200 witnesses in a panic. Damien heard the shift in the room before he turned. He turned anyway. He looked at Kane walking toward him and looked back at Elena, and she watched him do the math one more time, rapidly and without good options. "This isn't over," he said to her. "It's closer to over than you think," she said. Kane stopped 3 feet from Damien. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, and the weight of that standing was the weight of a man who had already decided the ending of this conversation and was giving Damien the opportunity to arrive at it himself. Damien looked at Kane. He looked at Elena. He looked at the room around him, which had not noticed anything, which was still running its ambient social machinery with perfect polished indifference. He looked at Kane again and said quietly, "You've made an expensive choice." Kane said, "Yes." One word, level word. Without apology and without threat, just the flat acknowledgement of a true statement from a man who had decided what the price was and paid it. Damien straightened his jacket. He looked at Elena one more time. She looked back. He turned and walked toward the main entrance. His people, whoever and wherever they were in the room, dissolved into the movement of the crowd and followed, and within 90 seconds there was no evidence that any of them had been there. Kane sat down in his chair. He put his forearms on the table. He looked at Elena. His jaw had a cut on it, small, a split at the bone from something blunt, already beginning to purple at the edge. She looked at it. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. "That's—" She looked at the cut. "That's demonstrably not true." "It's minor." "Kane." He met her eyes. He said, "What happened at the table?" She told him. All of it. The split entrance, Damien's approach, the defective account number, the offer, her answer. She told him levelly and in order because there was too much adrenaline in her system and the only way to manage it was to be precise about the facts. When she finished, he sat for a moment. "You told him no," he said. "Yes." "He needed that number from you, and you told him no." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was, she thought, the most unguarded thing she'd seen on his face since she'd met him. Not warm in any easy way, not soft, but fully present, fully without calculation. "Park Soo-yeon," he said. "Whatever he sent her." "She'll verify and find nothing," Elena said, "and then she'll publish." "In 4 hours. 3.5 now." He reached across the table and picked up her water glass and drank from it, which was such a completely human and unrehearsed thing to do that it almost broke the tension in her chest. He set the glass down. "Shin," he said. Shin was there. He was always there. "Pull everything we have on Damien's financial exposure," Kane said. "The extortion timeline, the contact records, the communications we've been holding, package it for the prosecutor's office." "Tonight?" Shin said. "In the next 2 hours," Kane said, "before the article goes live. I want it received before it's news." Shin moved. Kane looked at Elena. "It ends tonight," he said. "Or it gets worse tonight," she said. "We don't know yet." "No," he said. "We don't." She looked at the room. At 200 people who had seen an engagement announced, and a brief unusual stillness at the center table and nothing else. At the bar, where Park Soo-yeon was no longer standing. She'd left, Elena realized. She'd slipped out during the confrontation, quiet and professional. To go right. Elena breathed. She thought about the account number she'd carried in her head for 3 weeks without knowing what it was worth or what it would cost her, and she thought about an old woman gasping back to air under a restaurant chandelier, and she thought about her father's voice on the phone saying, "That's my girl," in the slow, tired register of a man who meant it across every year of her life. And she thought about what it meant that she was sitting in a room she'd never expected to be in, beside a man who'd never expected to want someone the way he wanted her, both of them waiting to find out what the next 3 hours would build or break. Damien Crowe was still out there. The night was not over, but for the first time in 4 days she felt the shape of the end. Not safety. She was too careful for that word. But the outline of something that was on the other side of this, the way you feel the shore before you can see it, the specific change in the water that means land is. The specific change in the water that means land is close is not a sight. It's a feeling in the current, a resistance, something pushing back. Elena felt it at the table. She didn't trust it yet. The next 3 hours were the hours that would determine whether what she'd felt was real or whether she'd mistaken the shape of danger for the shape of safety, which was a mistake you only made once in situations like this and didn't always survive. At 10:14, Shin sat down and placed his tablet on the table between them. On the screen was a confirmation receipt. The prosecutor's office, a digital timestamp, a case reference number that looked like a foreign language and meant everything. Delivered, Shin said. Kane looked at it. He looked at Elena. Your turn, he said. She picked up her phone. She called Columbus Regional. She navigated through 2 automated menus before a human voice answered, and she asked for the charge nurse on her father's floor by the name she'd memorized from previous calls. And when the nurse confirmed that Ray Whitmore was comfortable and stable, and that the gentlemen in the corridor were very polite and had brought coffee for the night staff, Elena exhaled something she'd been holding since the photo arrived on her phone 4 hours ago. Thank you, she said. She put the phone down. Kane was watching her. She didn't look at him immediately. She looked at the table, at the white cloth gone slightly rumpled at the corner nearest her, at the water glass with his fingerprints on it, at the small material evidence of an evening that had cost considerably more than it looked like from the outside. He's okay, she said. I know, Kane said. I had confirmation an hour ago. I didn't want to tell you until you'd heard it yourself. She looked at him then. You knew I'd need to hear it from my own call, she said. Yes. She sat with that. The specific quality of attention it took to understand that about someone. The kind of attention that required actually looking rather than assuming. She'd been looked at in various ways in her life, and she understood the difference, even when the difference was hard to name. At 11:07, Park Soo-yeon's article went live. Shin had the alert. He turned the tablet so they could see the headline, and Elena read it once and then read it again. And it was precise and sourced and carried the specific weight of journalism that had been built carefully over time and completed with a piece of evidence that locked the architecture into place. The account number appeared in the piece as a confirmed detail, cross-referenced with 2 independent banking sources Park Soo-yeon had clearly been cultivating for months. Elena's name appeared nowhere. The article's sourcing read, from a witness whose position precludes identification. Shin set the tablet down. It's been picked up by 3 international outlets in the last 4 minutes, he said. It will be the lead story by morning. Elena stared at the headline for a long moment. She thought about the corridor at Lumiere, the frosted glass panels, the ambient noise, the way she'd been focused on her tray and registered a name and a number without intending to, without understanding what she was carrying. She thought about how much a moment could weigh when you didn't know you were in it. What happens to the coalition now? She said. The prosecutor's inquiry is automatic once the evidence package is received, Shin said. The ministers will be asked to provide account records within 48 hours. Park Jae-won is named in the article. His passport will be flagged before morning. And Damien? Shin's expression went to the careful neutral. Damien is a more complex problem. He loses his leverage, Kane said. Tonight. That's not a small thing. It's not the same as him being gone, Elena said. No, Kane said. It's not. She looked at him directly. Tell me the truth. What does he do next? Kane was quiet for a moment. The cut on his jaw had darkened, a deep bruise blooming at the edge of the split, the kind of mark that would look worse in 2 days before it began to fade. He hadn't mentioned it again, and she hadn't pushed, but she'd watched him move across the room and watched the slight adjustment he made when he turned his head to the right and understood that the jaw was not the only thing that had happened in the lower corridor. Damien is rational, Kane said. Not moral, rational. He operates on viable options. Tonight he loses the option that's been funding 6 weeks of leverage and whatever concessions he extracted during it. His exposure from the extortion itself becomes significant once the coalition's people are in front of a prosecutor. He may calculate that cooperation is worth more than continued aggression. Or he calculates that you're the reason he lost everything and he responds to that, Elena said. Yes, Kane said. He might. She appreciated that he didn't soften it. So this isn't finished, she said. Not completely, Kane said. But the shape of it has changed. He was operating from a position of information advantage. That's gone. What's left is personal, and personal is a harder basis for a sustained campaign than strategic leverage. She sat back. The room was thinning, the event winding down, people gathering coats and making the social sounds of departure. 200 people who would read the news in the morning and understand, or not understand, that something that had begun in their presence tonight had produced something with real consequences in the world. Una reappeared at 11:20. She'd been taken to a car after Kane's instruction, and she'd clearly spent the intervening time doing whatever Una did when she was waiting and didn't want to be waiting. She came back with the slightly compressed energy of a person who'd exercised patience through clenched teeth. She sat down and looked at her brother's jaw. "Tell me the other person looks worse," she said. "Yes," Kane said, which was all he said about it. Una looked at Elena. "Are you all right?" It wasn't quite a question in her voice, more the statement of someone checking a fact. "I've been better," Elena said. "I've also been worse." She thought about 14 months and the peeling shoe and the drawer facing the wrong way. "I've definitely been worse." Una held her gaze for a moment with an expression that was the most complex thing Elena had seen on her face, something that contained calculation and warmth and the specific hesitation of a woman who was deciding whether to say something she'd been holding. "My brother," Una said, "has not sat at a table with anyone other than Shin and his business contacts in 4 years. He has not introduced anyone to me in 6 years. He has not—" She stopped. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at Elena. "He has not looked at a room and found it lacking since our mother died. He just looked at everything that could go wrong tonight and said yes anyway." Elena didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you what to do with that," Una said. "I'm telling you it's real, so you know." The room continued emptying around them. They left at midnight. The car was waiting. The driver had the specific quality of a person who had been contacted about a change of timeline and had handled it without event, and Elena got in and sat back against the seat and felt the accumulated weight of the day settle into her body in a way she hadn't been able to feel while everything was still in motion. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders ached with the particular deep tension of hours spent holding herself in a posture of steadiness she'd had to manufacture while her nervous system ran at a frequency it wasn't designed to sustain indefinitely. The cut in her mouth from where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek, sometime during Damien's approach to the table, had been making itself known for 2 hours. She hadn't noticed until now. That was how adrenaline worked. It paid on credit. Kane sat beside her and looked at his phone briefly, and then put it away and looked at the city moving past the window, and she looked at the city too, and they rode in silence that was, she noticed, not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had too much to say and enough sense to know that the car at midnight was not the place. They arrived at the Hanam Dong building. In the elevator, she looked at the brushed steel doors and their reflections in it. Him with the bruising jaw and the slightly wrong-angled shoulder, her with the black dress, and the exhaustion that was starting to show at the edges of her eyes. And she thought about the first time she'd been in this elevator, 3 days ago, and how much had happened since, and how none of it had felt possible from the position of that first ride up. She didn't know if that was terrifying or clarifying, probably both. She was finding those were often the same thing. In the main room, Shin produced 2 cups of coffee with the efficient silence of a man who understood that coffee at midnight after a night like this was not a preference but a necessity. And then he sat at the table with his tablet and worked with the focused quiet of a person who was not finished even though the event was finished. Elena stood at the kitchen counter. She looked at the 6-burner range. She said, "Is there anything in this kitchen?" Shin looked up. Kane, who was standing near the window, looked at her. "In what sense?" Shin said. "Ingredients," she said. "Actual food, something I can cook." A pause. Shin rose and opened the refrigerator with the air of a man who was not frequently asked this question in this context. "Eggs," he said. "Some vegetables. Rice. There's broth." He looked further. "Ginger. A few things." Fine, she said. She took off her jacket, the one Yuna had found to go with the dress, and folded it over the back of a chair, and she rolled up her sleeves and she began to cook. She made congee. It was the right thing, warm and simple, and requiring enough attention to give her hands and her brain something to do while the adrenaline finished its slow recession. She cooked the rice in the broth, added the ginger in thin slices, moved through the steps with the quiet efficiency of someone who had made this dish in small apartments at late hours more times than she could count. Shin watched her for a moment with an expression she couldn't read, and then he went back to his tablet. Kane stayed at the window, but she could feel him watching her in the way she felt the weight of a room's attention. Not uncomfortable, just present. She cooked without speaking. The kitchen filled with the smell of ginger and warm broth, and the specific temperature of the room changed by a few degrees in a way that had nothing to do with the actual heat. And by the time she set 3 bowls on the counter, she felt more like herself than she had since she walked into Lumiere restaurant 5 weeks ago and set down a bottle of wine she hadn't been asked to put down. Shin ate, standing up. He said simply, "Good," which Elena accepted as the high compliment from him that it was. Kane sat at the counter and ate without ceremony and without the kind of performative appreciation that people offered food when they were trying to make a point. He just ate, like he needed it, like it was exactly what it was. Elena ate standing at the counter looking at the range. At 1:15 in the morning, Shin's phone rang. He took it to the far side of the room and spoke briefly in Korean, and when he came back he put the phone in his pocket and said, "Damien Crow's attorney contacted the prosecutor's office 40 minutes ago. A cooperative posture, apparently. He's offering testimony about the coalition's activities in exchange for a discussion about his own exposure." The kitchen was quiet. "He's cutting a deal," Elena said. "Attempting to," Shin said. "Whether it succeeds depends on what he has and what the prosecutor needs." "Does that mean he's done coming after us?" she said. Shin considered this with the care he gave every question. "It means his primary calculation has shifted from aggression to self-preservation. Those are not the same thing, but they produce similar outcomes from our perspective." Kane looked at Elena. "It's not a guarantee," he said. "I know," she said, "but it's better than 4 hours ago." "Yes," he said. "It is." She rinsed her bowl. She dried her hands on the dish towel and set it down on the counter and stood there for a moment with the particular stillness of a person who has arrived, unexpectedly, at a pause in a long motion. "I need to sleep," she said. "Yes," Kane said. She looked at him. The bruise on his jaw was a full presence now, purple dark at the center, the cut at its core still precise. She looked at it for a moment, and then she crossed the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink. She'd registered its location 3 days ago as the most logical place, and found the first aid kit, which was well stocked, which she expected. She took it to the counter. She opened it. She found the antiseptic and a gauze pad. Kane watched her. "Sit," she said. He sat on the bar stool without argument. She had to step closer than was comfortable or necessary in a strictly medical sense, and they both understood that and didn't address it. She cleaned the cut with the precision she'd learned in nursing school, 2 years of which she'd left behind, but none of which she'd forgotten, and she covered it with a small adhesive pad that was the right size. She did it without asking about the shoulder, because she could see that he wasn't going to let her address it tonight, and that he would handle it in whatever way he handled things when he was alone and didn't need to be steady for anyone else. She stepped back. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "It's a cut. It needed cleaning." "I know," he said. "I'm thanking you anyway." She held his gaze for a moment. "You said once that you wanted a life where you didn't have to be alone," she said. He was very still. "I heard that," she said. "I want you to know I heard it. Not just the strategy part, the other part." He said nothing, which she had come to understand was not absence but presence, the way some people were most completely there in silence. "I'm going to sleep," she said, "and tomorrow I'm going to call the Culinary Institute about the deposit. I'll have Shin—" "No," she said. "I'll handle it." She looked at him steadily. The conditions stand: my life, my work, my decisions. I know, he said, just making sure we're still clear on that after everything tonight. We're clear, he said, and then quietly, I wouldn't have it different. She believed him. That was the complicated part. She believed him, not because he'd said what she wanted to hear, but because he'd been consistently honest with her in ways that had cost him, and the pattern of that honesty was more reliable than reassurance would have been. She went to the spare room. She sat on the edge of the bed and took off the expensive shoes that had, she was surprised to discover, been more comfortable than her second-hand flats from Hongik Market. And she sat there in the quiet of the east-facing room and looked at the window where the city was doing what it did at 1 a.m, still bright, still moving, indifferent in the way large things are always indifferent to the small human fires burning inside them. She called her father one more time. It rang 4 times before he picked up, which meant he'd been asleep, and his voice had the specific texture of a man woken from a dialysis day rest. "El, it's 1 a.m. I know, I just needed to hear you." A pause. She heard him shift in whatever chair or bed he was in. "Security guys outside my room are still there," he said. "Polite fellows. Korean, I think." "They are," she said. "You going to explain that sometime?" "When I see you," she said. "In person." Another pause. She heard the television, low, a late program, voices she didn't recognize. "You met somebody," her father said. Not a question. She almost laughed. It came out as something in between. "Yeah, Dad. I met somebody." "Good?" he said. She thought about Kane Voss at a corner table refusing bread, and 4 words delivered like they cost him something, and a first aid kit under the kitchen sink, and the truth told consistently in ways that made it harder to receive and also more real. "Complicated," she said. "Your mother used to say complicated was just interesting in a difficult stage," he said. She sat with that for a moment. "Get some sleep," she told him. "I'll call Sunday." "Call Saturday," he said. "I worry." "Saturday," she said. She put the phone down, she lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about her mother, who she didn't talk about often because the loss of her 4 years ago had done something to the structure of things that had never fully reknit, and about what it meant to be the kind of woman who raised a daughter who moved to Seoul with 2 bags and held herself together across 14 months of quiet endurance, and about whether her mother would have understood this week or been terrified by it. She thought she'd have been both, and she'd have said that was fine. Elena slept. She slept deeply and without dreaming, which was the sleep of a body that had spent itself completely and needed to recover before it could manufacture anything as elaborate as a dream. She woke at 7:40. The city outside the east window was already fully in motion, morning light on the Han River visible between 2 buildings to the right, a long gold stripe of it that moved slowly with the current. She lay there for 3 minutes, which was as long as she'd lain still in the morning since she'd come to Seoul, and she thought about the Culinary Institute application on her phone and the $3,000 deposit and her father's voice and the bruised jaw in the kitchen last night. Then she got up. The main room was quiet. Shin was not at the table, which was the first time she'd been in the penthouse without him present. Kane was in the kitchen, which was becoming a constant. Coffee already made, window behind him showing Seoul in full morning operation. He looked at her when she came in. He registered that she'd slept. Something in him settled slightly, visible only because she was beginning to know what to look for. "Shin?" she said. "He went home at 4. He'll be back at 9. She poured coffee. She stood at the counter. "The article," she said. "It's been picked up by 11 international outlets as of this morning," Kane said. Park Jae-won's attorney issued a statement at 6 denying the account's connection to his clients. The statement will take until about noon to be completely dismantled. He looked at his own coffee. The prosecutor's office opened a formal inquiry at 7:15 p.m. She nodded. "Damien," she said. "His attorney was in a meeting with the prosecutor until 3 this morning," Kane said. "I don't have the specifics yet, but the fact that he went in says what it says. He's trying to save himself." "Yes." "From the coalition. Primarily, he was extorting government ministers. When this breaks publicly, those ministers are going to need someone to redirect attention toward. Damien makes a convenient alternative narrative. So he's giving them what they need to prosecute the coalition in exchange for reduced exposure on the extortion. That's the likely shape of it, Kane said. She drank her coffee. He's still out there, she said. Even if the legal situation resolves, he's still… Yes, Kane said. He is. He held her gaze. I'm not going to tell you that's not a real thing. He may recalculate once the legal pressure lifts. He may not. Can you deal with that? Yes. She looked at him. How? By making sure the cost of moving against you is always higher than whatever he might gain from it, he said. Not through threat, through position, through what you will be in this city and in my life. That's not a guarantee of safety, nothing is, but it's the most durable form of the option available. She thought about that, the honesty of it, the refusal to make promises that were too clean. Okay, she said. She set down her coffee cup. I want to go to my apartment today, she said. I need to replace the lock and I need my things. I'll send… Alone, she said, with a driver if you need to insist on it, but alone inside. He looked at her for a moment. She held the look without moving. Fine, he said. And I'm going back there, she said. To live. I'm not moving out of my own apartment, Kane. I know. You didn't look like you knew. I was hoping, he said. She almost smiled. It felt strange on her face after the last 18 hours, like a muscle that had been clenched and was slowly remembering how to release. There's a difference between hoping and expecting, she said. Yes, he said. I know that difference. I'm working on it. She looked at him across the kitchen counter in the morning light, with his bruised jaw and his careful honesty, and the coffee he'd made before she woke up, because he'd known she would need it, and she thought about what Una had said. He looked at her room and found it lacking, and she thought about her mother's phrase about complicated being interesting in a difficult stage, and she thought about the peeling shoe at Lumiere and the old woman gasping back to air, and 4 words delivered like they cost him something. She thought about what it meant to choose someone, not the strategy of it, not the protection of it, the actual human act of deciding that a person was worth the full weight of your attention. She picked up her coffee again. I'm going to call the Culinary Institute at 9, she said. All right. And when I have my enrollment confirmation, I'd like to cook dinner here, a real one, not congee at midnight. Something moved across his face, brief, unguarded, the face he made when something arrived that he hadn't prepared for. Yes, he said. I'd like that. And you'll eat all of it, she said, including the bread. He looked at her. I noticed, she said. You don't eat bread. That's a life decision I intend to challenge at regular intervals. He was quiet for a moment, and then slowly, in the careful way of a man who had stopped expecting things and was therefore very deliberate with the things he allowed himself to want, he said, I'll eat the bread. She nodded, like they'd agreed on something that mattered, because they had. At 9:15, she called the Culinary Institute from the passenger seat of the car, with the driver maintaining a professional silence and the Han River visible to her left as they crossed toward Mapugu. The admissions office picked up on the second ring, and she explained her situation, and she listened to the enrollment coordinator walk through the deposit timeline, and she said she could have it by end of the week. She didn't know exactly how. She had $400 to close. Her savings were what they were, and she would find it the way she had found everything for 14 months, by counting carefully and refusing to let the arithmetic determine the outcome before she'd tried every option. She was not going to take Kane's money for this. That line was clear and would remain clear. Some things you had to arrive at yourself, or they didn't mean what you needed them to mean. The coordinator said the fall cohort had 2 spots remaining and could hold one through Friday. I'll call back Thursday, Elena said. She got to her apartment at 9:40. The driver waited outside. She went up alone. The lock had been replaced. Kane had arranged it, she assumed, without asking, which was going to be a recurring negotiation between them, and she was not without the patience for it. The new lock was better than the old one. She could acknowledge that. Inside, the apartment was exactly as she'd left it. The drawer was still facing the wrong way from when Damien's people had gone through it, because she hadn't been back to fix it. She fixed it now, opened it, removed its contents, replaced them in the correct order, closed it. Drawer facing the right way. She stood in the middle of her apartment. It was small and efficiently managed and full of the evidence of 14 months of building something in a foreign city with inadequate resources and no safety net except the one she'd woven herself out of discipline and a refusal to frame difficulty as failure. It was hers. She opened the folder on her nightstand. The culinary school application, complete and ready, her father's latest medical summary, the photo from 1994. She looked at the photo. Her parents, young, standing in front of a car that was too old even then, her father's arm around her mother's shoulders, both of them laughing at something that had happened right before the shutter clicked. You could see it in the tail end of their faces, the laugh just finishing, the happiness still fully present in the way happiness is fully present when you don't know yet that you'll need to remember it. She put the photo in her bag. She was not leaving, but she would carry it. She checked the time. She had a shift at Lumiere that evening. She'd called Ji Young from the car, confirmed she'd be in. Ji Young had been quiet for a moment, and then said simply that she was glad, and Elena had heard the many questions in the simplicity of it, and knew they would be asked eventually and dealt with honestly. She packed enough for 3 days. On her way out, she paused at the door. She looked back at the apartment, the drawer facing the right way, the efficiently managed space, the evidence of someone building something careful and ongoing and hers. She turned off the light. She locked the new lock. She went downstairs. The driver was where she'd left him. She got in. She looked at her phone. 3 texts from Shin. Operational, update style, the language of a man who communicated in data. Damien Crow's attorney had confirmed a cooperation agreement in principle. Park Jae-won's assets had been flagged by the banking authority. Minister Cho had issued a statement announcing his intention to fully cooperate with the inquiry. Things were moving. Fast, the way things moved when a structural failure began, not one piece at a time, but in the sudden cascade of a system losing coherence. She put her phone away. At Lumiere that evening, she arrived at 6 and changed into her work clothes and put on her shoes. New ones. She'd bought them between the apartment and getting back into the car, flat black with a solid sole and no peeling. And she went through the pre-service briefing with the same quiet efficiency she'd brought to this job for over a year. Ji Young found her in the back corridor at 6:20. The photograph from the announcement is in 3 newspapers this morning, Ji Young said. You and Kane Voss. Elena smoothed her apron. I know. The restaurant is... There are people asking questions. Let them ask, Elena said. I'm here to work. Ji Young looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman trying to find the right category for what she was seeing and failing, because the category didn't exist yet. Are you all right? Ji Young said finally. Just that, directly. Yes, Elena said. I think I actually am. The shift was ordinary. She carried trays, she served courses, she moved through the gold and marble room with the efficiency she'd built over 14 months, and felt, in the specific muscles of it, the continuity between who she'd been when she started and who she was tonight, which were not the same person but were connected by an unbroken thread of choosing to keep going. Table 9 was empty. She looked at it once, briefly, and thought about what it had contained 3 weeks ago. The cold man who refused bread, the woman who put down the wine, the silence afterward, and she thought about what it contained now, which was nothing yet, just the clean white cloth and the waiting. She looked away. She finished the shift at midnight. She was walking to the back corridor when Mr. Choi stopped her, the sommelier, precise as always, who had not spoken to her about anything beyond wine logistics since the night everything changed. Miss Whitmore, he said. He paused, which was unusual. You did well, that night, with the woman. She looked at him. I thought so at the time, he said. I should have said it then. She nodded. Thank you, Mr. Choi. She went to the back, collected her things, and stepped out into the Seoul night, which was the way it always was, enormous and continuous and blazing with light that didn't belong to anyone. She stood on the street for a moment. Her phone showed a message from Kane, not operational, no updates, no reports, just, how was the shift? She typed back. Table 9 was empty. A pause of 30 seconds. Then, it won't be Thursday. She stood on the street outside Lumiere Restaurant in Seoul, 14 months and a world away from Columbus, Ohio, holding her phone and reading a message from a man who had told her the truth when it cost him something and eaten the congee she made at midnight and asked about her shift like it was the most important data point of his evening. She thought about the photo in her bag, her parents laughing at the tail end of something, the happiness fully present. She thought about what it felt like to stop managing toward and start arriving at. She put her phone in her pocket. She walked toward the corner to find a cab. The city was all around her, enormous and indifferent, and full of the noise and light of millions of people building and rebuilding their lives in the same ongoing, imperfect, unfinishable project that humans had always been engaged in. She was part of it. She had always been part of it. She was just less invisible now. She flagged a cab. She got in. She gave her address in Korean that no longer cracked under pressure. The city moved past the windows, and she let it, and she breathed, and for the first time in 14 months, through all the shifts and the wire transfers and the culinary school folder and the drawer facing the right way and the woman gasping back to life and the 4 words that had started all of it, she did not feel like a woman managing against something. She felt like a woman arriving at something. It was not the same thing, and the difference she was finding was everything. End.